Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and I'm excited to introduce you to our guest from Tucson, Arizona, Terri Dennis, a.k.a. the Martini Diva or Pop Art Diva. Welcome, Terri.
Well, thank you, Tammy. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Good. Terri is the author-illustrator of some books related to cocktail recipes, and she's also created some coloring books, so that's a really interesting mix. So tell me, how did you get started creating the books that you've written and the coloring books?
Well, I originally started doing cocktail recipe books because I create original cocktail recipes and have done for 10 years as the Martini Diva. I am a professional illustrator and had always wanted to do a coloring book for kids, but never got around to it. And finally, when I retired from being a freelance illustrator, I had some time. And I did my first book, which was a mandala coloring book, just a few months ago. And then it occurred to me it might be kind of fun to do cocktail recipes. And that's how Color Your Cocktails came about.
Color Your Cocktails. That sounds like just fun with that. So expand a little bit about what makes your cocktail books different than what somebody might find, you know, at a traditional bookstore related to making cocktails. My illustration style would be one thing. I have some fun cartoon illustrations in there. And most of my recipes are original recipes that I've created, and I tried to make them simple for most people to use for things that they would normally have in a home bar or a kitchen. And also I try to be as healthy as possible with all of my cocktails and all of my recipe books. And then I include the recipe actually in the coloring page so that it becomes a cocktail book, a cocktail recipe book, and a coloring book. And a conversation piece.
It is, yeah. You know what? I've actually had, everybody in my area here loves happy hour because they always know they can come over and get a unique cocktail around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So one time I pulled out my coloring books and we had a cocktail coloring party, and it was a kick.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun because it's unique and you're coloring and having a good time. That's actually a really good idea.
It was even more fun after they had a couple of cocktails.
Tell me about this new project. It sounds very intriguing. I've heard that grayscale coloring is something that a lot of people are starting to seek out. And the title of this is cool, The Changing Face of Women. Tell me about that grayscale project.
Well, I have always been fascinated with faces and masks my whole life. And I have, over the years as an illustrator, I've done series of masks, and I like women's faces. And I work in a very contemporary style. So, and I was influenced by people like Peter Max. And so I have that kind of, it's perfect for coloring books because I would do a line art or a black and white ink sketch, and then I would watercolor it or acrylics or whatever and create my images. And I have so many of them. I didn't know about grayscale coloring books. I just assumed that I would be doing black and white line illustrations for my coloring books. And then I realized that I could use these paintings and illustrations that I had done as a grayscale coloring book. And most of mine were women's faces. And so
I looked at them, and I have one in particular called Woman Unmasked, where the woman's face goes from having a mask to being, to use a better term, naked with no mask, etc. And I thought, well, it's interesting because women, the changing face of women over my lifetime, and that's kind of how I got the title, was the changing face of women and our freedoms and, how things are different for us than they were for, say, our mothers or our grandmothers.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing the finished book on that. So you talked a little bit that you were a professional illustrator artist. So with the books that you're creating now, are obviously everything is probably an original design. Do you hand draw everything, or do you incorporate computer-generated images? What is your process?
I hand draw all my images. Then I go into the computer and I will do cleanup on them, and sometimes I will maybe put the background in via the computer, but they're still drawn because I use a Wacom tablet or Wacom tablet, which is a drawing pad for artists to draw in their painting programs. And so it's still drawn, but it's drawn digitally as opposed to hand-drawn. But personally, I prefer drawing on paper. I'm old school, let's not say how old school I am. And I like the tactile feel of that pencil and pen and brush in my hand and that canvas or that paper under my hand as well. But I do make use of the computer mostly to clean my images up and then, of course, to prepare them for print.
Wow. So do you think when you're creating your different illustrations and thinking about these books, do you have a target audience in mind? Who are you creating these books for?
I would say probably women, although I do have other books that I think men would enjoy doing. But at this point, I think women would probably be my largest market. And I try to keep my books for all ages as much as possible. I like, even though the cocktail recipes are cocktails, children can still color those pages, although I do call that an adult coloring book because it's got cocktail recipes on it. But my other books are for all ages, and I like to keep my images not quite so detailed and complicated that a child could not do them, or say there's a lot of elderly people who color and they have vision problems and et cetera, that making something too detailed, et cetera, would be difficult for them. So I do a range of fairly simple to mildly complicated illustrations for my books, and I like to be able to reach people of all ages if possible.
So do you think why do you think that the adult coloring books are such the rage right now? Everywhere I go, for example,
yeah.
Even at the grocery store, you'll see little mini books to bigger books in the magazine racks, and obviously
I have companies calling me, my old companies that I worked for that, before I retired, calling me and asking me, please come out of retirement and do a coloring book for us. Brands want them, everybody, because they're hot, and it's the big deal right now. I think the reason why is, coloring is calming. It is very therapeutic. But I think the biggest thing, I think, personally, is that it takes you back to childhood. It gives you a chance to reconnect with that inner child where you didn't have the stresses and the troubles of adult life. And it takes you away from everyday life and gives you that moment of reconnecting with your inner child and the joy that you had
That's beautiful. So, talking about that, there's a lot of health benefits. Can you talk about what you've either experienced or read about that?
You know, I've read a lot. I mean, psychologists have been using coloring therapy, coloring for quite a while, long before the adult coloring craze came in, for therapeutic purposes. I can't speak to it medically, but I myself, obviously I'm a colorist because I do my illustrations and then I add color to them. And colored pencils are one of my mediums that I used as an illustrator, one of my favorites, along with pastels and watercolors. And that was always my favorite part. Of course, I love color, and I think, color makes us happy, okay? And there's just something about, when the line's already there, then you're into just the enjoyment of applying the color and seeing something come alive in front of you. And, it's just, you're doing something that, probably creates good alpha waves in your brain. At the same time, you have at the end of your day something beautiful to look at that you can put up on the wall or use as wrapping paper. I mean, I tell people, hey, what do I do with these pages that I've colored? Well, print them out if you don't want to, if you want to save them, print it out on your printer and use it as wrapping paper, use them as greeting cards, Obviously, you can hang them up on a wall and you can send them out to people, et cetera. But, there's something you have in your hand that you did, at least partially you did, that you can feel accomplished with. And, feeling accomplished is a very healthy thing.
Oh, that's really, I like that, the idea of creating a wrapping paper or something useful out of it. Yeah. And I can imagine how beautiful that would be to give somebody a gift wrapped in this original paper that you actually colored and created, because it has all that positive energy in it too, and all that love. That's really a good tip. So, speaking of tips, can you give us, say, 3 different tips about how to get the best results when you're coloring something, especially if you're trying to color something that you'd like to keep around for a long time, hang on a wall, or give as a gift?
Well, number one, I think most colorists, from what I see, they use a lot of different mediums. And a lot of coloring books print on both sides of the paper. I do not. All my coloring books they're only printed on one side, so that if you're using markers or something, or if you're using pencils and you press hard, the impression doesn't ruin the other drawing, and it doesn't bleed through. So I would recommend, even if it's a coloring book, is to take maybe a box cutter or an X-Acto blade, or and put a ruler down against the binding edge where the book is bound, and maybe cut your pages out if you'd like, or take the book if you can and put them on a flatbed scanner and scan them. And I think a lot of people already do this. And then you can pick the kind of paper you want, because not all books. I publish through a company that only has one type of paper. And if somebody wants a different type of paper, it's fine if they take that image from my book and scan it and print it out on, say, watercolor paper. I take mine and print them out on watercolor paper because I like to color with watercolor as opposed to pencils, because when I'm using colored pencils, of course, I feel like I'm working again, because that's what I did for a living. I was an illustrator. And even though I used watercolors as an illustrator as well, they are a freer medium, so I enjoy that. And so I will take pages and print them out on a watercolor paper. You can buy watercolor paper to go through your printers. Let me see. Another archival, you're talking about keeping your images. there's professional artists work within specifications for archival procedures, and that means you use certain levels of mediums, okay, and professional quality paints, etc., and markers and stuff. You pay a lot of money for because these markers don't fade as quickly. I mean, they actually do tests on these and can tell you how long something will last in, if it's protected from ultraviolet light, etc. So, and papers as well, acid-free papers that are archival that last for hundreds of years. So as a professional artist, you have to know and understand the archival processes. And this is something that colorists who might want to keep their images for a long period of time and preserve them might want to look into some of the archival procedures that professional artists use, and be careful what they're using. I've seen people using, blending materials that aren't necessarily archival, and could actually damage the mediums, the pencils or the markers or the paper that they're using. So my recommendation would be before you use, say, a blending medium like petroleum jelly or something, you might want to check and see what effect that could have on your paper, etc. And that's, that gets a little complicated. But if you want to preserve something, then you need to follow archival procedures.
That's good advice, because I have heard of people that they talk about petroleum jelly, hairspray, cosmetics, and other types of mediums that may not be traditionally thought of as art supplies.
And I didn't want to mention any products in particular, but yes, those are three that I would specifically. Petroleum jelly, I'm not too sure about. It is obviously a petroleum product. As a professional illustrator, I don't use petroleum jelly. I use mineral oil. Okay? Mineral oil is a something that I used as, we used in oil paints, that can also be used on, say, Prismacolors and wax-based pencils, oil-based pencils, etc., to use that as a blending medium. Hairspray, that's a definite no-no. There is lacquer in most hairspray or other chemicals, and these chemicals will definitely damage the paper. Get a professional fixative, and there's two kinds of fixatives. There's a workable fixative that you can spray on top of your work and still go back and work on it. And then there is a final fixative where it completely seals up. And if you're working in wax-based pencils like Prismacolors, etc., these pencils, because of the wax, over a period of time, you'll see this white bloom. We call it a bloom. It's this white residue that comes up and dulls down the colors, etc. If you use a fixative, that does not happen.
That's a good tip. Yeah, so in other words, if depending on what you want your end result to be, if you want something to last a long, long time, then learn the lessons as if you were an artist and learn archival rules. If you just want to have fun, just go for it, basically, and you may lose something just because you mixed something that was not the correct way to do it. So
personally, I think if you're going to color for fun and relaxation, I think you should get crayons. I'm sorry, but that's what you used when you were a kid. And crayons, I think just the smell and the touch and the feel of those crayons going on the paper all adds to the experience of taking you back to your childhood. And I can appreciate that colorists there's a lot of colorists that get very, very involved, and they have hundreds of sets of pens and markers and pencils. I mean, more than I do, and I'm a professional artist, okay? And I understand that, and I appreciate it. But I think when you get too, I don't know the word I'm looking for, don't get too stressed out about it, If you're doing it for enjoyment, if you're doing it for fun, if you're doing it for therapeutic purposes, then keep it simple. And remember why you started it in the first place. You're not a professional artist, and unless you want to be one, then don't give up the joy of the original experience that you had as a child. And so those little sets of watercolors, that little dried up watercolors that came in the little pallets, where they're all dried up. Exactly, praying, etc. Praying was the one. I was not a happy camper unless I had my praying watercolors and my Crayola crayons. If I didn't get my 64 set of Crayola crayons at Christmas time, boy, howdy. And, of course, I always did. I looked forward to it. That brand new, gorgeous, fresh box of unused crayons. Okay?
With the sharpener.
With the that horrible sharpener. But, and the thing is that to this day, this is so funny, to this day, I go into an art supply store, and, if I didn't have any self-control, I'd be walking out with every brand new set of felt tip pens and colored pencils and pastels, because there is nothing like opening up that box of brand new, completely untouched, billions of colors, and I still love that, okay? I still love it. And, even when my pencils get down to little stubs and I have to use a pencil extender, and I'm sitting there going, oh, goody, I can start a new pencil in this color now. It's sort of silly, but it's exactly. I'm just addicted to all those beautiful sets of fresh, gorgeous colors.
That's cute. So do you think that this whole adult coloring book thing is a fad or a phase that we're just going through?
I think it will be for some people, definitely. Some people are going to try it out a couple of times, and they're either going to like it or not, or they'll do it a few times and then they'll move on to something else. But the fact of the matter is, there are people, adults that I know, I happen to know 3 of them right here in my neighborhood, that have been coloring for decades, long before it became this huge rage of, trending thing going on. Because they enjoyed it, and maybe they got started, when calming or whatever, but they, sorry, that's my reminder came up. Happy National Pecan Day. The thing is that people who enjoy it and for calming and stress relief, or just for the joy of it, they're not going to stop coloring. I think it might die down a little bit, and maybe the crayon manufacturers and the marker manufacturers might ease off on their production a little bit, because I understand that they're coming up with shortages, which is a little scary for a professional artist, because I keep thinking, oh my God, what if I can't get my pens and pencils? But no, I don't think it'll go away. It like all fads, yes, I think the brouhaha about it will die down, but coloring is here to stay. And even if adults pace back on it a little bit, kids are never going to stop coloring, and that's kind of, I like to aim, like I said, towards the whole family, because I think coloring is a nice family entertainment. Instead of watching a movie, grab a coloring book, give everybody a page, and put the crayons in the middle of the pencil, and get out the hot cocoa and have a coloring night. I think what a lovely family entertainment evening that is.
I agree, and it's interesting because as you described that, the hot cocoa and the smell of the crayons, and I could imagine how that would imprint really pleasant memories that would last an entire lifetime. It's very interesting that you're talking about the possible coloring or pencil shortage or pen shortage. That makes me think about the business side of coloring books. So if I wanted to get into becoming a coloring book publisher. How would I get started doing that?
Well, you mean as a publisher as opposed to artist, okay? That's two different
like
things.
If I wanted to, I'm not an artist, but I could see where I could still probably publish coloring books if I set my mind to it. Or if I am an artist, what would I need to do? Just real basic steps of where I could look for information, or what I need to think about if I want to do this, either as a hobby or as a business.
Well, if you are an artist, you can publish your own book. Obviously, many of us are. We're making use of print-on-demand services like Create Space and Lulu, etc. And there's several of them out there. So you can create your book, and they will literally publish it for you. And then Create Space actually publishes it to Amazon for you. There's some limitations to using print-on-demand services. You probably aren't going to get a spiral-bound book. You're not going to get perforations where you can tear the page out of the book. You won't get any die cuts. So you can't get like children's books. Remember how they used to be die cut into the shape of a little bunny or something? None of these specialty print services will probably be available to you. But those services also raise the cost of the production of a book tremendously, and I think most colorists are less interested in that than they are in an affordable book. And so if you are an artist, you can, you do your drawings, and you want to do them in a high resolution. You want to do them at least. Now, this is where we get into the computer technicality, and you do have to know a little bit about that, or you might have to hire somebody to help you with it. But books, all printing, you need at least 300 DPI, which is dots per inch, resolution in your image at the same size, minimum, okay? You can work larger than that. And if you work larger, of course, it helps crisp the image up. You want to do your drawing. If you're doing line art, you want to do it in, as black ink as you can get, and then as clean as you can get it. And if you do use the computer software graphics program where you can clean it up, that's great. There are books out there that will help you with this. I can't remember Jason's last name. Is a gentleman that I talk with on Facebook named Jason, who has published a great book on how to publish coloring books. And his first name is Jason, and I'm sorry I can't remember his last name. I'm sorry, Jason.
I'll find that, and I'll include it in the show notes.
Yeah, and he put out it's a PDF and I think a hardcover book, and he put that out, and there's a lot of good information in that. So the first thing is that you want if you can draw, then you draw. And grayscales are like if you take a photograph or you have a painting. What you do is you turn that into a black and white grayscaled image. So it's like instead of taking it in color film, you would have taken it in black and white film, okay? And people are using their drawings and their paintings and their photographs to make grayscale books. And I think the colorists like those because they are coloring over an already toned image, okay? So instead of having to do blending themselves, and if they're not experienced, the image itself, the grayscale underneath of it, creates that toning for them and thus gives them a more painterly or more photographic-looking finished product. That's
actually a good way to describe that because I was wondering why the grayscale would be something that would be more attractive than just the black and white line art.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. I'd never even thought of a grayscale image, but in seeing some of the images the colorists have done over photographs, I thought, well, do you remember back in the day, of course, you're probably too young, and I'm too young even, once upon a time, before color film, photographs
photographs were hand tinted. Are you there, Tammy?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay. Photographs were hand tinted, and you probably, if you go on and look at hand tinted photographs on Google, you'll see what they look like. And those were done by, in those days, they used to use paint and then tint the images, get a little flesh color in the face and little red lipstick. I actually have a hand-tinted photograph of my mother that I prize above many things because, it's from the, like her from the 30s, and it was hand-tinted, and I just love it. And Greyscale images give that look, which I think is kind of cool and vintagey looking, but it depends on the image. More contemporary, of course, it won't. But what it does is it creates the blending for you.
That sounds like something that would definitely add to the coloring experience. How do you keep producing art day after day and creating all of these books that you've been creating? What keeps you going?
Well, you know what the thing is that I never run out of ideas. I have too many ideas. That's my problem. I go, I can do this or I can do that. I have probably about 19 different ideas right now for coloring books, right? And you have to pick and choose. And it's a matter of, for me, I'm a professional illustrator and a professional freelance illustrator, which means nobody is, I don't have to be at work at a certain time. Nobody's, I don't have to punch a time clock. I never had to. It requires discipline. You get up in the morning and you go to work, and that's, and if you don't, you get nothing done and you don't get paid. So for me, it requires discipline and a work ethic and a schedule, okay? Because I not only have to create my artwork, but I then have to produce it, and I have to do the layout and put it into book form, et cetera. I have to do the cover, and then I have to market it. I have to do all the social media. So all this has to be scheduled, and it's just, it's just a matter of knowing what needs to be done, prioritizing, and doing it. I literally work every day pretty much from about 6 o'clock in the morning and at least till 5 or 6 o'clock at night minimum, sometimes later. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and end up working. Okay? It's, that's how I do it, and I still don't produce. I still don't get out as much as I'd like to get out. I don't get as much done as I'd like to. Now, the other thing is I'm retired now. Okay? That means I don't have to do artwork for other people anymore. I did that for, let's just say, a long, long time, and I'm not going to say how long. But now I get to draw what I want to draw. That makes me happy, and that's what I'm concentrating on. I want to draw what is pulling me at the moment, and so I will work on one thing at a time. Not one thing at a time. I will work on, say, one of my black and white sketches of a woman's face with things coming out of her eyes and her hair, etc. Then I'll go in and I'll spend a couple hours cleaning up an image or creating a background or a page or whatever on my computer. But I kind of spread it out. And I try to concentrate on one book at a time because it's more efficient. But sometimes I have to take a break and do something different, like maybe a silly little cartoon of a lizard holding a martini glass, or, or a cat dressed up in a three-piece suit with an old-fashioned chain watch and a cigar in his hand, and I call him Fat Cat. And I don't know where he'll go, what book he'll go into, but he's cute. And so that's kind of how I balance my work day out.
Well, that sounds like really good advice. It's basically, if you want to keep producing, you have to put it into a schedule and do something every day to keep your projects going. So before we end our interview, do you have one last piece of advice that you think would be helpful to our audience?
Well, if you're a colorist and you're coloring for enjoyment, keep it simple. I'd say don't compare yourself to everyone else. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Color the way you enjoy coloring, and, just let the joy come in and quit worrying and comparing yourself to others. It's just not productive. It's not productive for professional illustrators either. The other thing is, for artists, is, what? Do what you love. If you want to make a coloring book, then I would say do coloring books on subjects that interest you. Do you sew? Then do a sewing book of some kind. Maybe make up some little patterns and do a page of buttons and, that type of thing. Work within the things that you enjoy. And if you do what you love, then you're going to love working. There's always part of being a professional illustrator that, like when I make the coloring books, it is not fun to go sit at the computer for 8 hours cleaning up little, my black pen went too far, cleaning them up and, resizing, and that's not fun. It needs to be done. The fun part is sitting down with my pen and my paper and doing my original drawing and let it go where it wants to go. But you don't get 100% of that. There's the other percentage that you have to do. Like any business, you got to do the paperwork and you got to do the taxes and et cetera. So when you are working on your artwork, do what you love. And if you're coloring, do what you love and don't worry about what other people are doing.
Excellent advice. So, Terri, where can we get more information about you and your books and services?
Well, you can, number one, my books are all available on Amazon, so you can search for The Martini Diva on Amazon.com, and my author page should come up on several of my books, etc., both my coloring books and my 4 cocktail books. My website, if you're interested in cocktails, is martinidiva.com. My coloring website is coloringlifehappy.com. And then my overall business website is popartdiva.com. And
Great.
then I also have a Facebook page for my coloring, which is facebook.com/coloringlifehappy. So if you want to follow me and like my page there, then you get all my freebie coloring pages and tips and occasional images of Bailey, my kitty, attacking my paper and my pens while I'm working.
That's great. So if you want to connect with our guest, Terri Dennis, go ahead and check the show notes, and you'll find all of this information in an easy, clickable form. I really appreciate all of the information you gave us today. I think you gave us some really good tips that are actionable and to help people who become more creative, and you gave some great information on the business side of coloring. So thanks a lot, Terri.
Well, thank you, Tammy. I really enjoyed it. It was fun, and people can always contact me through my social media sites if they have any other questions that I can maybe help them with regards to coloring.
This is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.